I want to give you guys a bit of a warning in advance. This session was a little bit different than the norm. The total number of dice rolled during this entire session was only 3. This was almost exclusively role-playing and decision-making, and basically setting the path forward. Um, so there's going to be what sounds like a lot of exposition, basically, and some of the politics and realities of what's going on. So if you have no interest in that and have no interest in that kind of information, I just thought I'd warn you in advance. With Vilcus dead and buried, the very next thing they decided, basically immediately, was that they both had to go and try and inform both Telvanni and Redoran about what had happened. Whatever was going on behind the lines, they wanted to treat this Telvanni-Redoran alliance as though it was real, as though it was ratified officially. And so they decided to split up. Flux would go to Telvanni, he has reputation there, and Fir Nasil would go to Redoran, as she has reputation there. Not as much, though. For reference, pardon me, I actually made a mistake tonight. I forgot about their reputation with their respective houses. In the middle of the session, I had to rewrite some of the scenes because it hadn't occurred to me. But the way I do reputation is rather simple. If you have reputation at all, there's a pretty good chance you're going to be recognized if either you identify yourself or are seen in some manner that you're widely known as, if you understand what I mean. So, I'm going to go ahead and cover what happened to Flux first, but this is both happening basically concurrently, if you follow me. I don't want to go back and forth and back and forth. That just... So, Flux arrived at the edges of Selek-Nor, which is the capital city of the Telvanni. As he was just getting within range of it, out of absolutely nowhere, a scout popped out of one of the bushes nearby and said, "Are you Flux?" To which he was like, "Well, yeah, that's me." The scout said, "Please come with me right away. The governor's been asking after you." Flux decided to go ahead and go with him. He didn't really have a lot to lose. But now, having seen the gentleman in his camouflage, he looked around and noticed that there were actually quite a few number of scouts. Every few hundred yards, there was another one within a tree or in a bush or whatnot. All of them on very high alert. Now, as they made it to the city, which I described only in brief, it's very unusual architecture. I don't want to get too much into it. They went to a hidden area, which was well fortified, had several guards outside, and at the bottom, the scout led him to the bottom and said, "Here you go, sir," and then left. Now, within this room were 3 individuals, all standing around a 3-dimensional map of the island. This was a literal physical map, like a... Oh, I suddenly can't think of the name of it. The ones that are actually pulled up like this, you can see the mountains and stuff like that. And they were all discussing certain events there too. One of them was a field marshal of Redoran. For some reference, that is the actual highest rank that is in Redoran, because Redoran doesn't actually have a central leadership like the other 2 houses tend to do. That basically makes him one of the leaders of all of Redoran. The second individual is a general of Telvanni, and the final gentleman is a governor, Governor Anton, who is the governor of the province around Selek-Nor, and for all intents and purposes can be counted as the leader of Telvanni. Not literally, not on paper, just in practice. Flux stayed back patiently. He didn't want to interrupt, he didn't want to intervene with whatever they were talking about, until he overheard the governor talking about something along the lines of, well, even if we agreed to this mutual defense pact, we don't have the ability to provide reinforcements to defend against any retaliatory attacks, which are almost sure to come. And as he paused considering this is when Flux came in and said, "Excuse me, my lord, sir, I am Flux. I'm here." He doesn't actually have an official rank, so he just says, "I am Flux. I am here to report in," basically. And the governor recognizes him, because the governor has a brain, and says, "Ah, Sir Flux, it's good to see you. Of course, of course. Come in. What can we do for you?" And Flux kind of dances around the issue. The way he phrased it was actually really nice. Forgive me for not recalling the specific wording. But he said, "I have come to report that the unspoken web of interaction and conspiracy within the Hlelu government has been dissolved, and it is very likely that House Hlelu is, as we speak, falling apart and deconstructing as an organizational body." He says these in very vague words, and when asked, he basically says that he just received this news himself, and he decided that one of the first things he wanted to do was come to Telvanni and give this news to someone who could use it, aka the Governor Anton here. The governor says that fits in perfectly with what we've been hearing lately. Now, I try not to get too much into the background history and politics because I feel like I'm being boring every time I do. But all the the individual citizenry has the right, as sort of an absolute democracy within any given town, city, thorp, or whatever, to say we are a part of House Redoran now. We have decided, Redoran is best serving our interests, and this is what tends to form the boundaries, other than the land grab things, which I mentioned much some time ago. So, on in more than a few occasions in the past, a city or town or thorp or whatever will simply change sides bloodlessly. So the citizens themselves are not actually members of houses, if you understand what I mean. They are considered a neutral body. As I've mentioned, people are a protected resource in this island. Now, that means in order to become a part of a house, you have to officially join. Now, all three houses have different methods of joining. But in general, once you have joined, you are now a part of that government, whether on the military side, or the scientific side, or the magical side, or the governing side, whatever. At that point, you are no longer a citizen. You are now a member of that house. You follow? You still are protected as a living being, but you're not part of this fourth class over here, this fourth group of individuals, which is what the average individual is, and 90% of the populace of the island are. So the actual leadership, organization, defense, and infrastructure of these towns where the citizens live in is managed by a house. So, for example, if these people decide by universal vote to switch sides, what happens is the leadership basically picks up and leaves. Let's say Hlelu town wants to defect to Telvanni, because that's going to be relevant in a minute here. These leadership and the governor of that particular province all basically back up and leave. Sometimes it's bloodless, sometimes it's not. And Telvanni individuals from over here are promoted or picked or whatever, moved in, and they settle in. The citizens don't actually change, but the infrastructure and the overstructure does, if you follow what I'm going with here. That's all irrelevant because what that means is all the actual politicking, all the actual diplomacy, all of that sort of thing has always been on the house level. If a governor from Hlelu is treating with you, he is treating as a member of Hlelu, if you follow me, right? What Governor Anton relates to Flux is the fact that several of the southern provinces just on the other side of the Telvanni border, are now treating with Telvanni as individual provinces. Those governors and and their military forces and their infrastructure and all the people that make up what were formerly House Lelu have basically said they are no longer a part of House Lelu. They are not a part of anything. They don't want to join Telvanni, which is also something that can happen. They don't want to join Redoran. They want to be just that province, completely secular, if you understand where I'm going with this. And those provinces are individually treating with the new Telvanni-Redoran alliance, primarily with Telvanni. Now, again, this is one of those unheard of things. This is new. This is history in the making here. And this is why the governor says, that what you say makes perfect sense, because it sounds like Hlelu is completely disintegrating from the inside out. The two of them talk about some options for a little bit before the governor notices that some time has passed and he realizes he has to be at a meeting soon. So he leaves the... oh, I'm sorry, no. There's one other piece of information. Flux decides, based on his logic and intuition on the matter, that any military retaliation on behalf of Hlelu... Well, let's just say it's not going to be on behalf of Hlelu. It's going to be at an individual level, at a company level at best, more likely at a platoon level, as landed mercenaries, wealthy merchants, and governors who were, at the very least, I can't think of the word I'm thinking of, in on the overall conspiracy that Vilkas had started. He doesn't mention Vilkas, by the way. He doesn't mention that name at all. But those kind of people are most likely going to turn into warlords, for all intents and purposes, are going to be staking claims either of Hlelu itself or of the nearby territories. So while military protection is something that's going to be absolutely required, especially because some of these places are still having difficulties with the Harpies, nevertheless, it's most likely that whatever is a retaliation will not be on a national level. It is very unlikely that an army will march on Telvanni or Redoran. And the general and the field marshal decide to take this to heart and use that in order to help plan out their strategy of how they're going to distribute troops in order to help defend these new provinces, as well as their own, without, stretching themselves too thinly. I want to pause for just a moment to talk about the Harpies. I actually mentioned this to my players too. I have mentioned the Harpies on many occasions, and they were, for anybody who's curious, they were on the island before when the Scions were still there. They were part of the residents, and they were actually part of the working force along with the humans, the elves, and the dwarves. In the modern age, the Harpies are the effective equivalent of bandits. Almost all of them live in the mountains, which is relatively, actually almost to the point of totality, unsettled by the three houses. And the Harpies venture out rather frequently in order to raid because they want food supplies and that sort of thing in order to, keep living. Cor- there's a lot of bad blood between the Harpies and everyone else, basically, and vice versa. So no attempt at diplomacy has ever really been made, not in any written history. Similarly, the Harpies are an everyday threat to the point where just about any individual citizen you can point to probably has some kind of weaponry readily available, and even at the small town level, even the tiniest thorp with only a few, 100 or so, 200 population, still has people whose entire job is to, some cases it's rotated, but their entire purpose is to stand guard because if a harpy attack comes, they want to be ready for it. It's a very common aspect of island life. I mention this because it's part of the setting and part of the flavor of this island, but not necessarily pertinent to the PCs, at least not unless they want to pursue it. Because a harpy attack means nothing to the PCs, any more than an attack by several peasants wielding copper weapons is going to be a problem for the PCs. You follow me? But it is very much a problem, in fact, an everyday problem for everyone else. This is why I mentioned this here. Moving along. So, Governor Anton takes Flux away with him, and as they're leaving away, Anton pauses at a certain point in the hallway, turns and activates a hidden door, and moves in silently. Flux, of course, follows him. Anton closes the door behind him, and Anton goes up to what looks very similar to the teleport. I shouldn't say very similar. It's of a similar style. If you could imagine one of those really nice flat screen high def HDMI TVs, right? Comparing that to one of the old 50s televisions, they're both, you can see the conceptual similarities there. You can tell that they're similar, but one is obviously much more advanced than the other. Obviously, this is the 50s television version of the teleport pad. And when Anton turns and notices Flux staring at it, just because Flux recognizes this fact, he says, "Don't worry. It's something we've just invented within the last year. It's been tested and tested again. It is perfected to the point where we can use it for human purposes. We can only use it for brief periods of time, I'm afraid, because the energy consumption is insane. But we're still working on the technology, and I feel like haste is needed as of these moments, so I don't mind using up my allotments for the month." And Flux says, I know what a teleporter pad is, which Anton just kind of looks at him strange and says, "All right." So they teleport away to Anton's personal chambers, basically. Not chambers as in room. I mean like a building that he has built specifically for his own purposes. He goes through this building and leads Flux into a separate room where there is a man who is shackled up, kind of like this, and obviously not doing well, but he's not brutally tortured or anything like that. He's just been someone who's probably been left here in confinement for some time, and obviously not is kind of worried, if you understand my meaning. There's the stench of fear in the air, as I said. Flux is understandably concerned, especially more so when the guard, who he didn't even see, abruptly appears as he nods, and then Flux, it's the first time he notices them. This is actually the stealth mechanic I introduced to the game in action here. You don't see the person who's stealthed until you see them, at which point you see them just fine. It's a pseudo-invisibility thing. Moving on. So the guard nods, in acknowledgement to Governor Anton, and Governor Tin comes in and says, "Do you recognize the robes of this man?" And Flux looks at him, and he does have some political knowledge. In fact, he has skills, ranks in the skill. So I didn't even make him roll for it. He had ranks at all, which was good enough. This man is wearing the robe of a governor of Telvanni. And he says, "Well, yeah, this is a governor of Telvanni. He seems rather well appointed." Anton nods and says, "This man is a Hlelu agent." I love the reactions from the players from that, because it was immediately apparent what I was saying with this. You see, both players were already aware of the fact, and both characters were already aware of the fact, that Vilcus had agents throughout Redoran and Telvanni. The mere fact that he was able to round up several cutthroats, basically, within a matter of minutes in the Redoran capital says something. But this man was a governor of about like the last 12 years. I don't remember the exact number I decided, but This man has been a governor for a long time, and he is well known, well respected. And Anton turns to Flux and says, "Yeah, this man is why I know what the name Vilcus Goldtongue means." This is the first moment at which Anton reveals this fact, that he is aware of Vilcus and his role in things. You see, and I'm going to explain it to you rather directly rather than trying to recreate the conversation. The way Vilcus had things was, rather than have co-conspirators, Vilcus had a number of people who directly reported to him, and he completely managed everything. He had no the power structure was completely and utterly reliant on him. Nobody under him interacted with each other, if you follow me. Now, several of these people had basic agents, people whose only job was to be on call, basically. You just live your life in Redoran or in Telvanni until someone needs you. This is how they could whistle up help with relative ease. But each one of the actual agents, like Maxim from earlier, or this man, who I never gave a name, are people who directly reported to Vilcus. Now, they know some other agents. And the way that Governor Anton discovered this man was Maxim gave away a little bit of information, not very much. In fact, he only knew about two other agents that were members of Vilcus, and he only knew this because of his own interactions, because Vilcus never told anybody what the left hand or the right hand was doing. You understand where I'm going with this? But through Ambassador Cowell shared this information with Telvanni, and the governor pulled this man in and questioned him and found out, sure enough, he was an agent of Vilcus. And this man, who has not received orders in some time, I might add. No, that's a lie. I'm sorry. I take that back. I take that back. I forgot about that. I keep forgetting the time frame because I keep thinking it's been 2 days when it's actually been more like 4 hours since they killed Vilcus. Apologies. This man also knew a couple other people he believed to be agents. Now, Anton has basically extended this man a hand of friendship. You help us find the rest of these agents, who will help us find the rest of these agents. Every single time one of these Vilcus agents, who has been a member of our society and has been proven to not be, have committed some crime of horrible nature, will be shown amnesty if you, you know, actually join Telvanni and try and assist us in disassembling this spy network. This man took them out in his bargain and is basically waiting here in prison until his information checks out, or, as the case may be, doesn't check out. Now, all of this basically means that Hlelu is literally self-destructing right now. Vilcus had the entire organization power structure built upon and around him, and this is why it's breaking up. This is why it's going secular so badly, because so many of those people, the people who were at the very least aware of Vilcus and aware of what his plan was and were his agents, don't know what to do next. And this is why so many of them are going the warlord route. I want a piece of what's left kind of a mentality, which isn't actually going to last that long, by the way, but I'm not going to get into that here. Now, with this information, Anton reveals that he believes they have, thanks to the efforts of... Did I even mention that yet? No, I didn't. Thanks to the efforts of General Franklin from earlier. I don't remember if I said that. I'm sorry. It is actually quite late. I'm very tired. I apologize if I'm repeating myself. General Franklin, about 2 days ago, had a skirmish with several militia from Hlelu. Now, he actually mentioned this back in the battle meeting. I apologize. What he said was that during the battle, a large earthen creature of the type they'd never encountered before attacked the group, and Hlelu was routed, but Telvanni was also being assaulted by this creature, and it was only with great effort that they were able to drive it away. They weren't actually able to destroy it. Now, the general, immediately realizing the threat to the nearby citizenry across the border, sent several scouts and whatnot in order to contact the governors within these provinces, basically saying, we have been attacked by this great earthen creature, what can you do? Now, these governors have basically just received word that this great earthen creature had attacked their force, that the volunteer force that had been sent out, and so it becomes very quickly apparent to these governors that they have something of a common enemy. And this helps to diffuse a situation that was going to be very bad otherwise. Now, for those of you out there who have already put two and two together, forgive me for explaining it, but the earthen creature is in fact Flux. Franklin is spin doctoring the situation in order to try and in order to try and assist in the PR situation, because Hlelu has been being, both Hlelu, Redoran, and Telvanni, the east and the west, have been manipulated by Vilcus through his efforts in order to think ill of the other side for many, many years. In fact, this is part of the backstory of Flux. Flux was a mercenary who was freelance for a time, and for several years ago worked for Hlelu until he was given an assignment to murder several citizens, which he refused to do on moral principle, went to Redoran and reported the incident, which made Redoran think it basically solidified, because he had the official seals and everything, that ordering the hit. Redoran had the mentality that Hlelu was just a bunch of murderous thugs, and this basically solidified that thought. As you're probably already guessing, that assassination hit was in fact completely falsified. It was never intended to be acted upon. The entire purpose was to make Redoran dislike Hlelu just as much as they were using on this side, the PR, in order to make Hlelu dislike the East. You follow? So Franklin's efforts was the first wedge, the first attempt to diffuse the PR battle that was going on between the two sides, and that's basically what Vilkas had been afraid of this whole time. If the two sides started talking, all of his whole glass menagerie would fall apart very quickly, because these are just reasonable people on both sides. I try and make a point of emphasizing that to my players as well. So with the two sides starting to talk, this is what led to the southern provinces basically starting to decide, okay, let's work together. Let's split off. Especially since Hlelu, as I mentioned, is starting to disintegrate. Several of the governors on the west are starting to ramp up taxes to a really stupid degree, and several of the private mercenary corps are starting to get a little more thuggish because, well, I can just take whatever I want now because I don't have the paycheck I used to have, that kind of thing. Now, obviously, all this stuff hasn't quite started happening yet. Again, it has only been 4 hours, actually at this point like 5 hours, since Vilkas died. But all of this is going to start happening very quickly, which is why I'm getting this information across now. Anton and Flux discuss the situation for a time, and they come upon a degree of a solution to help diffuse the problem. Flux, oh, by the way, Anton is in on things. There are a very few number of people who are fully in on the information. Anton is one of them. He is aware of the situation with Flux and the fact that he assisted them and the fact that he is this otherworldly creature that they have no idea what, and he's okay with that as long as, he's on their side, basically. Flux proposes an idea of weaving an artificial corpse, basically, one of that will look like what he looks like when he takes on his Earth aspect in a self morph, and he will give this to Telvanni to use as a way to show. As they're going to go to these provinces, the former Hlelu provinces, the southern provinces, and say, with your permission and with some assistance, we're going to get some forces together and we're going to go and hunt this thing down. And after some time has passed, they're actually going to be able to present the corpse and say, we did it, And the whole point is just to get that first step. I mean, obviously this is a blatant lie. Although, as Flux points out, it's not quite a lie. He can basically guarantee that as long as Hlelu plays ball, this earthen monstrosity will not be attacking them anymore. But the point is to get those first few steps in. Once people start talking, it's a lot easier to keep talking in order to stay at peace than it is if both sides are still mistrustful of each other and aren't really discussing the situation. So, as they leave the room, as they're going back, Flux stops him in the teleporter room as they return, and says, "Oh, I'm sorry. No, he doesn't. He stops him elsewhere when they're basically completely by the room. He says, and Flux decides to go ahead and take him into confidence and share a piece of information with him. This will make, for those of you keeping track of it, a grand total of 4 people who are aware of this secret on the island. He says that he and his sister, through extensive efforts, have come across a way to raise the island, to return it to the rest of the world. To which the Anton looks at him, and his very first question is, of course, rest of the world? I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but the islanders don't tend to think there is a rest of the world because they've never had contact with it until 9 days ago. And yes, I counted, by the way. It's been 9 days since this whole thing started. And Flux says yes, and there's a lot of complexities in it, there's a lot of problems in that, and it is my personal belief that you and the Telvanni leadership deserve to be informed, and you can decide what you want to do with this. And Anton thinks about this moment and says, let me get back to you on that. And so Flux writes a letter to be sent by carrier pigeon to his sister, who at this point is already at Redoran's capital in Stone Ridge. And how did he phrase it? He basically said, Telvanni and Hlelu trying to situation diffused. He tried to phrase it in a way that if it was intercepted, it wouldn't be a problem. Situation diffused. Still waiting on word back regarding our mutual idea. something along those lines, and he sends it out. Now, let's go ahead and take this moment to skip to see what was happening over the last several hours on the other side, on Redoran. Fear Nasil arrived. Unlike the scouts and the hidden nature, the troops up at Redoran and around Stone Ridge are on full alert. There's actually a patrol. The people, the watchtowers are being manned, that kind of thing. And they do recognize her, and they say, ma'am, what can I do for you? I need to speak to Ambassador Cowell. And he says, I'm not sure where he is, but he's probably in the Citadel somewhere. So she runs in and she tracks him down. Cal is actually sitting by himself in a room, just kind of staring off into space, thinking. He looks ragged and terrible. He looks like he hasn't slept in days, actually. And Fiona Sill and him have a rather friendly discussion, all things considered. I don't know if I mentioned this, but Cal was formerly Lieutenant Cal, her direct superior. So these two have been friends for some time, years. And so they have a friendly discussion. And finally, Fiona Sill says, "Can I talk with you in private about my recent fishing trip?" And Cal just looks at her for a moment and he says, "Okay." And he finds a spot. I specifically described it. It's a part of one of their watchtowers that isn't manned unless it's actually being attacked. So between being outside of a watchtower, kind of cold and windy, but and the wind and the fact that there's no one nearby, they could carry on a conversation and basically guarantee that they're not going to be overheard no matter what. So Cal just looks at her like, yes. Fear Nasil doesn't beat around the bush. She immediately tells him about the island raising prospect. About well, actually, no, I'm sorry, that's not where she goes to first. She tells him, Vilkas is dead. We have removed him from the equation. Not really sure how that's going to go down. Blah 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 blah. And the two start discussing what they're going to do on the PR side of things. Cowell, of course, has several ideas about trying to push forward a PR campaign because he is aware of the whole earthen thing that I just mentioned with regards to the Telvanni, the earthen creature, and he wants to start pushing the idea that we have common enemies. And common enemies we've never encountered before, things that make the harpies look like puppies, and so he's going to try and push the idea of mutual defense to several of the officials on the other side of the border. And she nods and she says, "There's one other thing," and this is when she goes into the island. And she tells him, "We have the ability to return the island to the thing." And he just kind of looks into space and he says, "Huh." Now, this is when Cowell reveals to her that he, and only he, has been taken into confidence by Ariana with regard to a problem. You see, as I've mentioned before, Ariana has the ability to treat on the behalf of the Kingdom of Alluvia, and Cowell, newly elected ambassador, also has the power to treat with her. The two have already basically hammered out something of a mutual treaty of peace and trade. The only thing Vesayen Lassel has in all the island, regardless of which house, that anyone on the mainland cares about at all, uh, other than the psionic technology, of course, but they don't know about that, and nor has that been shared, and it's still, by the way, is the Purial deposits that they have. Now, I'll get more into this later, right at the coda of this video, but basically, they're the airship technology is still relatively new, only developed within the last decade or so back on the mainland. There are airship fleets. Most of the airships in the world are military, vast majority of them. Most of the mercantile organizations that have and use airships have like one or two for the entire company, and they use them for the big stuff or the expensive stuff or the stuff that has to get there immediately, valuables or large scale, something along those lines. Things that can't be taken by railway or by boat or by caravel for that matter, or caravan, sorry. My point is, airships are not commonplace. Diverting even a single airship to this island in order to trade with them, because an airship could, at least theoretically, fly in and then, go over the border here of the waterfall, fly in and then land, and then have no problem leaving, all that fun stuff. But even a single airship, which wouldn't be, it would basically be more expensive than it's worth, even for Imperial deposits, because it could only carry so much, and they would have to they would have to build a brand new airship for this purpose. So we're looking at several years before anything actually comes of this treaty. Cowell sees an opportunity here. If they raise the island, they can start trading by sea. They're only a few days travel away. I think I decided it's only like 2 days travel by ship with the wind well, or if you're using a Magicite ship, it's only about a day's travel. Not very far out, in other words. So a day's travel by ship is basically nothing, and they already have merchant ships. I mean, they might have to start upgrading them and in order to be able to travel out into the ocean rather than just in the sea around the island, but they can do this. That would open that trade possibility into the thing, and it would actually be able to bring some degree of prosperity to the island, which, frankly, the whole island's economy is basically going to be based on this imperial export very soon, especially with the way things are going overall with the political situation. It's very likely the island is at the very least going to become something of a confederacy when it's regard to the mainland. The island will be treated as one unit, and the riches and wealth that come from that trade and any technology or information or magic thereof will be shared across the confederacy equally. You follow me? So Cowell likes this idea. And he also likes this idea for another reason, because he thinks that he can use this spontaneous, miraculous event as another sign and try to push that on the propaganda side. This is another thing. We need to start uniting. We need to start to be treating things. There's an outside world out there now. We have to start dealing with it. We can't be bickering amongst ourselves. That kind of thing, right? He believes he can use this to the betterment of the overall position. So finally, Fiona Seal says, "So are you going to say yes?" And Cowell says, "I'm not going to say anything." Cowell looks at her and says, "There is no single individual on this island, in my opinion, who has the right to make that decision other than the people who actually have the power to enact it. There is no council or elders within Redoran that I see any reason or fit to consult on this matter. I leave this in your hands." And then Cal says, "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get some work done." And so he leaves and leaves her out there being like, Basically, he just told her, it's on you. Redoran officially is not aware of this, and whatever is done will be done regardless of Redoran's choices. She does pause for a moment to have a conversation with Ariana and Alexander, basically just saying hi for all intents and purposes. She does not share any information with them. She does not seek any information from them. She's just catching up. And then she gets a carrier pigeon from her brother. I mentioned this with the letter I just mentioned. Her response back is, "Redoran says go. Uh, when is something along the lines of when is our date going to be?" And she sends it back. Now, in the time it takes the pigeon to travel north and then travel south, Flux at this point has successfully crafted his simulacra, his would-be corpse of himself. And having done so, he gets the letter back and he starts looking and he's like, because he hasn't heard back from Anton yet. He goes to find an adjutant of some ability who gets him to see someone higher up, who gets him to see the person who is directly attending the governor at the moment. He says, "I have something of some urgency. May I please see the governor?" And the man says, "I will consult him. I will see, but he is in an emergency meeting." He goes in, and Anton is standing on a device, which I didn't describe because I like leaving it to the imagination. And he is talking basically at thin air. He's clearly talking between several points. He'll say something to this spot, and he'll blah 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 blah, and then he'll turn over that way and kind of nod in acknowledgement. Then he'll turn this way and be like blah 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 blah. And as he turns and notices, he pauses and says, "Pardon me a moment," and he removes an item from his ear. It's actually kind of on the outside. I know you can't see it because I got this headset on, but it's on the outside of his ear, like kind of like the glasses part. That's just right here. And he removes this, and he says, "Yes." And Flux basically says, Redoran is a go. If you guys say to raise the island, we will raise the island. Now, Telvanni, in total contrast to Cowell's response, what the governor is doing is having a magical Skype meeting, basically. I'm sorry, I can't think of a better word. A vid chat with all of the members, all of the governors who make up the council of Telvanni. And he is telling them flat out, what do we do about this matter? And so he goes and says, he says, "Okay, give me a moment," puts the ear thing back on and says, "All right, Redoran is given their blessing on this plan. I think this could assist us in many ways. I would like to," and he starts talking about some basics. I'd like to have a fleet or a couple of ships prepared to head out and do some scouting, see what they can see. But we can't spare too many, because we have to also spread out the fleet across the southern provinces because those ships are going to be part of the defense forces that we're allocating, blah, 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 blah. So finally, they all kind of... mind you, Flux can't see any of this. I actually did this whole conversation from Flux's perspective, as in, all he saw was Anton, me, just kind of nodding and occasionally saying a few words as I played the full conversation in my head, and I only shared half of it with him. Then he finally took the ear thing off and says, "The majority vote is such that we will go ahead and raise the island. When is the nearest time you can do so?" And Flux says, "Well, I could do so now if you wanted to. I'm done with the corpse. I've already delivered it to one of your lieutenants, so they're already moving forward with that. I have no other obligations." And Anton says, "Well, very well, then go ahead and do that." And Flux says, "Pardon me, could I see that for a moment?" Something that has been bugging Flux for some time is the need to have useful long-term communication between himself and his sister. And he takes this item. Now, he wants to do several weaving and knowledge rolls in order to see if he can try and reverse engineer this thing to some extent. At the very least, to get an idea of something to make himself. Now, this is also something that's relatively new amongst the Telvanni, and it's a huge power drain. It pulls from the elemental ley line itself. Well, no, it doesn't. It's not a direct pull. It's actually a pull from the latent energy, which means it can only be used so often, right? The ear part is attuned to the souls of everyone. What I'm saying is, like, you get these 7 people together in a single room, and you craft these things, you weave these items for their ears, and each one is attuned to the souls of these 7 people, right? In other words, any one of these 7 people could use any one of these 7 ear things, and it would work for him, and he would be able to talk to them, but only them, if you follow me. If someone else tried to put on the ear thing, it wouldn't do anything, even if they were standing on the pad. The pad itself provides the power. It helps channel some of the elemental energy directly into this device in order to connect them. You follow me? With these analyses, he believes, Flux believes he's a little bit closer in getting his communication problem fixed. But anyways, he sends a quick pigeon off to Fiernasil, basically saying, I'm good to go. I'm leaving now. And so he leaves, and she gets the pigeon, and she leaves, and the two meet several hours later at the first sanctuary. Now, of course, the sanctuary is sealed at this moment, ignoring the fact that they sealed it behind them. No one else has actually been in the region. In fact, there's no sign that anyone else has even looked in this direction since this whole affair began, other than, of course, themselves. Fiernasil opens it and goes in. I'm not sure yet if I should decide whether or not she ever closed it, because I think I'm going to decide she never closed it, and there's a good reason for that. I'll get to that later. But they get to the teleport pad, use it to port to the third facility, where the research facility, and get in and go to the device which had to do with controlling the island's segregation, the sinking thing. And she goes ahead and starts analyzing it. She discovers, to her amazement, that in her analysis, essentially the island was not physically sunk. Now, this is going to be hard to explain because what was done was essentially bending physics, okay? Yes, I know magic does that in general, but bear with me here. I have, like, no props to describe this with. Imagine a flat sheet of paper here, okay? Now, what they did was they essentially took this perfect circle here, actually a perfect sphere, to be honest with you, and warped it such that it was pulled in on itself, but to its own relation, to its own perspective, it was pulled down physically, okay? So the island was segregated from the rest of the world. Now, obviously, the magical barrier, the one that was made prior to this being done, prevents other people from even seeing or even being aware of this island, unless they are of considerable power. But, or know it's there for that matter. But this segregated it in such a way that anything trying to go over the edge, so to speak, would basically be absorbed into the elemental ley line itself. This is why the fleets that had been sent on many occasions in the past from the island to the waterfall to try and figure out if there's a way up, around, or through were never heard from. They were literally dissolved into the elemental ley line. That waterfall isn't actually a waterfall. That is effectively a visual representation of the elemental ley line being warped around the island. It's effectively an extremely powerful and extremely effective illusion for all intents and purposes. And this is also why the ship that Alexander and Ariana came in, the Magicite ship, vanished, because when it went over the edge, bzz. Now, they got quite fortunate. Of course, I did this on purpose. You see, they had a bit of a backup plan in mind in case someone, for whatever reason, who shouldn't be, accidentally found themselves plummeting over the edge and were going to die as a result thereof. He put these stone pillars. I mentioned these way back when in the description of this island. All you have to do is touch the pillar, and it will teleport you down to the island proper. And, of course, whatever ship you're in is still going to go over the brink, but at least you're alive, right? Like I said, it was just kind of a backup plan. So they learn all this fact, and she goes ahead and activates the thing, and it gives you a warning. This cannot be undone. I mentioned this in brief earlier. Basically, if it was to be redone, it would have to be rewoven and recast from scratch. You know, they'd have to figure out how exactly Mandakir and his team of technicians and mages had successfully accomplished this fact, and then accomplished again. So, in other words, this is something they can't really undo. This is the moment I've been building to for the last 9 days of game time. She goes ahead and says yes. Go ahead and raise the island. Now, I was very careful in my description of this, even though I got it wrong the first time. So, but there were problems. It didn't go as well as I would have liked. But I got to reiterate it because one of the players was starting to fall asleep. It was late, like I said. Anyways, what happens is basically nothing. Flux, who is Flux and Fiona are both standing there, kind of tense. They're feeling, if there's going to be like a vibration or anything like that, or or if there's any sound, but there's nothing. It's like nothing has changed at all. Although Flux feels this kind of like, huh? Just like a weird feeling, and he only gets about a half a second to put any thought into it before everything goes immediately pitch, utter, complete black. All of the lighting that has been going throughout the facility, all the consoles, all of it just turns off, just like that, in an instant. Now, fortunately, they have some torches on them, so they can pull those out and light them. And I want to stress again, they're basically in pitch darkness. I don't know if I've described this place physically properly enough, but this is essentially a cave which was carved out within the center of the mountain at the center of this island. In other words, there's no entrance or exit. This is a bubble of cave in here. And in fact, the oxygen levels were going to be an issue soon enough if they stayed there too long for obvious reasons. And they look around and try to examine what's going on. Flux immediately goes to the scanning room because he believes, maybe he can figure out what's going on here. And he rolls rather high. This is two of the rolls that I mentioned. He rolls rather high and trying to figure out what's going on. He basically finds out that there is not even a hint of power coming to this device at all. And when he and based on that information and everything else he knows about the overall situation, I have him do a knowledge elements roll. And he rolls well enough that he deduces what has happened. As a result of this island having been twisted in such a fashion for so long, centuries, it has become apparent that the ley line itself had also become twisted along with the rest of it. So when the island was returned back to normalcy, the ley line is still down here, now completely and utterly disconnected from the island. Now, I've been talking a lot about a lot of the technology, a lot of the magic, a lot of the facets of this island. Virtually all of them are possible because this island was literally made out of elemental earth energy, okay? Obviously, the facilities are completely powered down. They have an idea, though, very good idea, to basically make a battery out of materia, because materia is natural magic, just like the ley line is, right? So they believe that can work, and while this is a good idea, it would be like, I forget the description he gave, but it's basically like trying to put an 8-volt battery to power a building. There's no way. There's nowhere near enough juice in order to do that. So he cannot get the scanner working. But it could get the teleporter working. He could weave this battery thing with the materia, sacrifice a materia to the teleporter in order to, not permanently, it'll be hooked up there and it'll be powering it so that they could get out of this facility. I also made a point, and my players picked up on this rather well, that the Scions who built this place, it never occurred to them that their power or their technology or their magic might fail, because there are no other ways out. There is no escape hatch, there is no physical backup, there is nothing. It never even occurred to them that their system might fail in any fashion. And since this is the first time it has failed, I suppose that's something, but point remaining. So they power up this teleporter pad, and they realize the way this is going to work is very simple. With this pad now active, they can teleport to any other pad that they have activated, but that pad is going to be off when they get there, so it's a one-way trip. The only exception to this is if they go to the hub, the garden, the thing that I described way back, and because that pad, at least they theorize, I should say, is disconnected from the island, physically, literally, metaphysically, whatever you want to call it. So they have a pretty good chance of going to that hub, that pad, and then from that pad going to any other pad. At that point, it'll be a one-way trip, unless they sacrifice another materia. So they get together and they say, okay, let's go ahead and put the materia in here, make this little battery thing, and they teleport to the garden, to be continued. That is literally when we ended. The players insisted I stop before I describe what's going on in the garden. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit in brief and a little bit of a coda here about the full ramifications of what the players have just done. Every single aspect of this island has been determined by the last several centuries of its total isolation from the world, and the only way that has been possible is because so much of their life is defined by this connection to the ley line that the island was built out of. I want you to imagine for a moment that you live in a world where electricity is very commonplace. I know, it's hard. But in all seriousness, try to picture as if electricity as a concept was just kind of taken away from your life all of a sudden. Not just for things like what you're sitting on now, or I guess you might be listening to, but like the light there, or the engines in a car, or anything static. I'm talking about mobile things too. Your phone no longer works. Your pacemaker no longer works. If you have a hearing aid, that no longer works. Anything that functions on electricity has just had that electricity removed from the equation. Doesn't exist anymore. That's the closest I've been able to come to express what's going to happen, what has just happened to this island. Now, obviously, they don't know literally yet. All of this is conjecture because they haven't been able to get out yet, if you follow me. This is why whether the door was left open or not was relevant, and I'll make it a point to mention it to them next session. But the only reason the land on this island, as small as it is, has been able to feed these people for 2 centuries is because the land is constantly being replenished. It is consistently arable, and it is consistently healthy food that is being grown. The only reason that they have any kind of resources whatsoever with regards to wood or with regards to copper or any other or stone is because those resources naturally replenish because the island sort of reverts itself on a regular basis because of its connection. And it's worth noting that that energy hasn't been draining over this time. Even if it had been, it would have been at such a minute level it wouldn't matter. But over time, all of this is naturally being returned back to the island in some manner or another. A weapon left on the battlefield, for example, will literally be absorbed back into the ground and returned as earth elemental energy, because it was made from that to begin with. You follow? The point is, all their food, all of their culture, all of their agriculture, all of their construction, all of their economy, everything has been based upon this concept, which has just been removed. At this point, the thought occurred to both my players very strongly, we need to get well, obviously we need to fix the situation, but for the immediacy, we need a right now solution because this is going to be bad within like a week. Crops are going to start going bad pretty much within a matter of days at this point, and food is going to start becoming an issue immediately. Never mind the fact that now we're going to actually be at the mercy of things like weather patterns, for example. Just to name one example that comes into mind off the top of my head. So the funny thing is their very first thought is we need to get this Puriel, to the mainland and start that trade route immediately, and then it suddenly just dawns on both of them. The Puriel, the renewed source of Puriel upon which they had this whole plan to have the whole island be revitalized by this new economy and trade with the mainland, isn't replenishing anymore. Now they have some Puriel, but not a lot. And in fact, most of it, this is kind of future knowledge here, most of it has literally already been gathered together and is going to go on the first boat to the mainland. So they're going to trade the majority of the Puriel they have total to the mainland in their very first gesture because they don't know their supply just got removed. Unless, of course, the players try to intervene. So they spent several minutes. Obviously, we still paused before they went to the garden, but they'd spent several minutes standing around and trying to think about what they could do and trying to come up with some way to band-aid the situation. The long-term solution, which Fear Nasil came up with immediately, is we need to rebend that ley line back to the island in order to, because obviously it was designed to be there. What we have done is basically broken the entire island. And another thing that neither player mentioned, which is something that I'm going to mention to you guys because it's worth considering, is it's very possible that this island, which was built out of elemental ley line energy, may literally disintegrate over time. Because, yeah. Now, moving a ley line is a feat that's going to require someone of enormous power and knowledge. Duh. That's Fear Nasil's objective. We need to fix this no really style. Flux had the idea of trying to find someone of significant power, but not that much power, to basically make a tributary of the ley line to reach. And his big idea was he wanted to connect it simply to certain areas. For example, a particular chunk of farmland, or to the Perial veins, so that the Perial could get renewed, so they could get this trade going, and actually be able to afford purchasing food and stuff like that. Now, while that's a pretty good idea, all things considered, he and indeed nothing. His very first question to me was, "Is there anything on this island, even if we all joined forces, that can do that?" And I just said, "No, no one on this island, including you guys, combined with everything else, has the capacity to pull off a feat like that." So they're gonna have. So his plan is to find someone to put this band-aid in place, so they could at least get the trade going for now, while they try to look for a more long-term solution for their home, which they basically just doomed. And they're not even sure how much they've doomed it yet. Now, um, I'm always left with interesting decisions like this, because I'd planned for this whole incident from the beginning. One of the things I had not really thought about was them going to the garden. And the garden is going to be impacted by this. I'm still deciding on the full details of how and why, but I'm really looking forward to seeing where they go with this next, because my god, man. So that's it, and I guess I will talk to you all later.